We'll call the City Council regular meeting to order for Monday, November 4th, 2024. Would everyone please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Call the roll, please.
Mayor Hoyt.
Here.
Councilmember Bernance. Here. Councilmember Lean.
Here.
Councilmember Wilson.
Here.
Councilmember Burgum. Here.
All right. Any changes to the agenda?
None.
Leah, Nick, Holly, Katie, Steve?
Yeah, Mayor and Council, I would like to propose one change to our agenda, and that is to make, I would like to make a motion to move all items under 12.2, to move those to a future date. I think what makes sense about doing that is we have completed the AUAR, and as I learned from Deanna today, that actually starts the approval timeframe from essentially our approval date forward. I think that'll allow a more, I guess, essentially comprehensive and open dialogue about this critical item. So I think moving this to a future date, possibly to align with our comprehensive plan interim update, would make the most sense.
So your motion is to table all items under new business to a future date to be determined.
I don't know if table is not, I guess I would suggest removal and then consideration at a future date. If tabling it and then essentially lifting it off the table at a future date, I guess it would serve the same purpose.
Okay, so there's a motion on the table to remove items 12.1 and 12.2 from the agenda.
Nope, just 12.2.
Just 12.2. So motion on the table is to remove items 12.2 from the agenda. Is there a second? Is there a second? The motion doesn't pass. Any other proposed changes to the agenda? Lynn? Anyone from staff? All right, seeing no other proposed changes, I'd seek a motion to approve the agenda.
Motion to approve.
Motion by
Second.
Katie, second by Holly. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Aye.
Let the record reflect a nay vote. Our next item on the agenda is citizen comments. This time is reserved for citizen comments. Anyone wishing to speak can come up at this time. Citizen comments are a time for anyone to address the city council on items not on the agenda. Those speaking should state their name and address and limit their comments to 5 minutes. The council will not engage in discussion on the topic, but those requiring a response will be responded to before the next official city council meeting. Go ahead.
My name is Ali Ayub. I live on 22232 Cambrian Way, Farmington. I mean, I have a bunch of houses around the neighborhood too. I mean, why are we going through this? I mean, you see all these people paying taxes, and here you are sitting there, let these people come and take our houses and make noises all over the place. Would you like something behind your house? No, you don't. There's other people here don't like this. I don't know why you don't listen to us. But like my dad always said, we always are the little cockroaches because money talks and the little ones just sits behind. Because this is all about money. It's not about the people here. That's what it's all come down to, money, greed. Because if there was no money, this would never happen. I mean, we live there. I lived there like 8 years. Other people live there their whole life. Why you have to come and destroy it? Because they're paying more money? I mean, watch what we did for the community. I mean, we pay taxes. I mean, all of us pay taxes. I mean, why don't you listen to us? Why do we have to keep dragging it to here? I mean, is it fair? Would you like your kid to play where there's all this data center going on the noise? No. So why don't you, for once, listen to the people here? I mean, everybody is crying about this. I mean, but you don't care because it comes down to what the money That's all it comes down to, nothing else. Because if you care about us, you will vote no today. That's all there is.
Thank you, sir.
This is a non-agenda item. I would like the city council to consider for a future time updating the city code to include the term technology park. That's not something that's in the city code today, so I would highly suggest that the city council considers adding the term technology park and defining what it is. I'd also like to just also opine a little bit on the Bengal project. The Bengal project is a potential data center that's going in to Farmington. It's not on the agenda tonight. And I'm just, just very much concerned and want everyone to understand that, that the Bengal project is coming. It is a major industrial use. The industrial use, you can tell that it's an industrial project because of the amount of power, the amount of water that's going to be required specifically in the Bengal project. And it's going by other industrial uses. Directly across the street from Pilot Knob is a very large gas conjunction, station. So, and it's makes a no-brainer to put the Bengal project there. I just kind of wanted to come out tonight and, say that's a great spot for a data center. It's a great spot for that to go, and just recognize the fact that that is an industrial use. So, and simply concerning the industrial, you can tell it's industrial because, again, the amount of power, hundreds of megawatts of power are going to be required. I am a little concerned just about the Bengal project and the impact that it's going to have on power rates. We've all heard that Xcel is going to have the cost of power going up. There's a direct correlation to that and the number of coal power plants that the state of Minnesota has vowed to stop operating by 2040, and most of them by 2030. And the power required to power the Bengal project is significant. And currently, there's only about 3 power plants in the state of Minnesota today that could power that individually. So when you start looking at that, and obviously, like, it's very, very simple economics says that the amount of power that's something that requires, you have a very large demand. And, should there be other data centers that are in the city of Farmington or in Rosemont or in Apple Valley or over in Hampton or anywhere else, just that overall consideration, so that we might just want to consider about the Bengal project specifically, that we may not want to, have so much power that we're causing a strain to our residential customers. We were already looking at increases of 10 to 15 cents per megawatt hour that you use at your home. And that's just, just because of the coal power plant shutting down, not to mention the draw that the Rosemont data center is going to have, or not to mention the draw that the Bengal project is going to have, or not to mention the new project that's going to be up in Apple Valley. So I really think it would be a good time in the city's very near future to define exactly what a data center is, to truly understand about how much power is going to be used and operated from the Bengal project, how many water towers and infrastructure costs that it's going to be. And I would highly encourage, before the city consider another data center project, that we really ask ourselves, is this the way that we want to grow? Is this how we want to generate tax revenue? I'm for it. I'm for data centers. I think they're great in an industrial use area like the Bengal project is going to be, with minimum impact to residential, minimum impact with easy access to power. That big, huge power line that runs along 50 makes a lot of sense to have that project there. It makes a lot of sense to be up in Rosemont, to have that Meta data center there too. So. But I highly recommend that the city council, add some terms to the technology park, to the city code. I really think that that will really help us define our future, and it might be a really good time to take a pregnant pause, for lack of a better term, but to take a pregnant pause and really define these things and really decide, do we want more Bengal projects in the city of Farmington? without, some of those terms being in the city code, and also understanding the proper way that we would go about that is to update the city code and then update the comprehensive land use plan and then potentially update the zoning that, rezone some properties that we may need to do as well. Another great spot would be south of the fairgrounds. There's another great spot that's available for a data center, but I think that we definitely need to define what those things are. In 2015, when data center was first brought to Farmington, they were much like the data centers that were up in Egan, 5 megawatt facility. They're not the same. And, going out to Iowa or somewhere else and looking at these things and really recognizing that these sit on industrial pieces of land, I think is a really good thing to consider. Should we do other projects like the Bengal project in the city of Farmington? Would that be a good idea moving forward? And is it a good time to take a pregnant pause, to table some data center discussion and really kind of look forward to, do we really want those things all over the place in Farmington? They cluster, they come together. We're already seeing that across Dakota County. And I really think that TRACT in particular, preys on small communities that don't have updated city codes, that don't have updated defined definitions for data center. And it's predatory and it's wrong. But that's okay. The Bengal project is a great place to allow that. So again, my name is Nate Ryan. I'm live over there on Cambrian Way, a little house with a beautiful wife and 2 kids, and kind of happy that I don't live right next door to the Bengal project, but that's okay. Somebody's got to bear the burden. So unfortunately, those folks who do live right off Flagstaff will have to bear that burden of the Bengal project. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Hello again. My name is Dave Aiken. I live at 22390 Beaumont Avenue, Farmington, Castle Rock. I guess I can't talk about tonight, so I too will talk about the Bengal project. I really think we need to push this back and tap the brakes. We're talking about people, neighborhood, and process. This should be sent back to planning. I appreciate the fact that you guys did your research. You've been listening the last few months, more so. Appreciate that. I know you guys have a tough spot. This is a vote of a lifetime that you're in the middle of tonight. Again, coming to the Bengal project, it'd be nice for the citizens if we could work in facts and specifics, not statements and ambiguity. I guess there's not spot zoning on the Bengal project or an amendment to the comp plan, so I guess that's being handled properly. I think both the Bengal project and others need further study. I personally in no way think that these are light industrial. They're hyperscale data centers. It's about as far from light industrial as you could possibly come. I don't even know how we could zone it like that with a straight face. Please follow your own rules and guidelines, unlike the Fountain Valley project, which apparently that wasn't followed so well. I'd like to talk about setbacks should be 1,000 feet on the residential sides. Maybe not so much where it's farm field or the ag like the Bengal project is, but 250-foot setbacks are totally unacceptable. Also, the fact that there's not setbacks for generators that hold 300 gallons of fuel 40 feet from where a child may be playing. Doesn't really seem like there's any firm plans. Anyway, you guys have a tough vote. I appreciate you listening. I guess this isn't for tonight either, but I really appreciate the fact that Steve tried to step forward and tap the brakes on this, which is what really needs to be done. But the silence of the other 4 members was deafening. It sent a significant message. You still have the chance to vote your conscience to do the right thing. We should have tapped the brakes, we didn't. Maybe we can tap the brakes on the Bengal project. Please vote for your citizens. The room is packed. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
So, I worked at North High School in Lakeville. You guys probably all know the building, heard of it in sports and everything. I ran the building. It burnt 1,400,000 gallons per year to cool that building on little cooling towers. I know on Cambrian Way, I can only water my grass every other day because we got a watering ban. Where are we gonna get this magical water from? They're gonna go pound wells in deeper than we got. So guess what? You're gonna be here to the taxpayers. We're gonna have to drill deeper wells so we can get more water. You guys need to think of this, where we're gonna get the water, where we're gonna get the electricity that we don't have to pay for it. We can't just keep paying. I got a 2-bedroom Rambler and I'm paying $5,100 a year in taxes in it. I can't even afford to live there to retire. In 4 years when I want to retire, I have to move. It's a shame that we have to pay these kind of taxes on our houses. Now I'm going to have to pay for wells and water towers and everything, electrical grids. I moved to Farmington because it was a small community. We don't need this. It's crazy. You guys are people, you're the ones that we elected for you to run the city of Farmington. Now you need to run it tonight and show us what you're going to do for us. Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak?
My name is Drew Roach, and I'll speak on something that I didn't really want to have to bring up, but I guess I will. As somebody who's running for office, who's talked to more voters and more constituents in Farmington than anybody in this room the last 75 days, I know how these people feel. There are many more people that aren't here tonight that feel the exact same way. I want to thank Steve for stepping up and trying to do the right thing. I want to thank Holly for the other night for her candor and acknowledging that if this was going to be in her backyard, that she wouldn't like it. I also want to bring it to the attention that there's a city staff member who tried to intimidate me from showing up to the Planning Commission and speaking out against this project. So my question is, why are we rushing this? What is the rush? I think Steve had a very good motion on the table tonight. I would have loved to see somebody else make a second and do the right thing. Hopefully you guys will continue to do the right thing and vote no. I know I'm not supposed to talk about that tonight, but you know what? That's why we're all here. It's the elephant in the room. Do the right thing.
Thank you. Anyone else? Last call. All right, we'll move on to item 7, which is our consent agenda. I'd seek a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Motion to approve.
Motion by Steve,
Second.
second by Nick. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, we'll move on to new business. Item 12.1, which is Resolution 2024 TAC 97, adopting the final alternative urban area-wide review, the AUAR, for the Farmington Technology Park. Deanna.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Tonight, as the mayor mentioned, what is in front of you is Resolution 2024-97, which is the adoption of the final AUAR for the Farmington Technology Park. As a reminder, the AUAR is an environmental review process. It looks at those potential environmental impacts that are associated with anticipated development within a geographically defined area. The Minnesota rules must be followed when it comes to these environmental reviews, and this is a planning tool. It looks at development scenarios, maximizes those scenarios, and then identifies mitigation that would need to take place through all the various state agencies, as well as at the city level, to ensure that a development meets all of those environmental guidelines. What you have on the chart in front of you is the process. Again, it's defined by Minnesota rules, and you can see where we are today, which is the adoption of the final AUAR, and its mitigation plan. The Farmington Technology Park AUAR encompassed 3 parcels and approximately 343 acres. You can see on this map outlined with the red dashed area, the area that was included within this. Again, it analyzed potential impacts and identified those mitigation measures associated with 2 different scenarios. One was a technology park, and the other was mixed residential and commercial uses. Tonight we have Allison Hardwood with us. She's the Director of Natural Resources at WSB. The city had hired WSB to help us through this process and to review the document to ensure that it was adequate and accurate. So with that, I'll turn it over to Allison and she'll walk through the rest of the presentation. Thank you. It's just the down button. The down button, okay. All right, good evening, Council. Thank you, Ms. Coonan. As she mentioned, my name is Allison Harwood. I am Director of Natural Resources with WSB, a consulting firm who helped the city staff with review of the AUAR that was submitted to them and processing this through the state process. What's up here on the board is just some relevant definition or terms that you may see throughout this presentation. EQB is the Environmental Quality Board. That's a state board that runs the environmental review program, though the implementation of the program is passed down to the local government, the responsible government unit, in this case, the city of Farmington. There are various types of environmental review. EAW, or Environmental Assessment Worksheet, is a familiar one to many local governments. Environmental Impact Statement is a fairly high level of review, and an AUAR, or Alternative Urban Area-Wide Review, is a hybrid of the EAW and the EIS methods. As mentioned previously, the AUAR is a state environmental review document. It's the hybrid of an EAW and an EIS that studies the effects that different development scenarios or land uses may have on the environment and community infrastructure. The advantage of an AUAR is that it can be completed years in advance and can review large areas that may contain multiple individual developments, but still includes a level of analysis that allows for planning and it can identify mitigation. It's used as a planning tool to identify the potential for cumulative impacts of anticipated development within an area. Excuse me. It's used to identify mitigation measures for those potential impacts to inform future permitting, planning, and zoning decisions for both cities as well as developers. It's important to note that AUARs do not approve or deny a project. They're simply a planning tool. If multiple development scenarios are reviewed, it's required that at least one must be in conformance with the current land use plan. Additional scenarios are also often included, and often they're reviewed as the most dense or impactful scenario that a particular area could have. There are several steps in the AUAR timeline. Some projects, such as this one, require an additional step on the front end called the scoping AUAR. The purpose of the scoping AUAR is to give reviewing agencies an opportunity to review the proposed scenarios and study area and make suggestions on perhaps other scenarios or amended or revised study areas. Following that scoping process, which happened in June and July for this project, the RGUs adopt an order to prepare the AUAR. That document, called the draft AUAR, is prepared and then distributed for a 30-day public comment period to both agencies and the public. Once that 30-day comment period is completed, the city and the developers or the applicants take those comments, revise that AUAR as those comments may be needed, and that final document goes back out to the agencies for an additional 10-day review and objection period. If no objections are received, the RGU can adopt the final AUAR. Once an AUAR is adopted, it's valid for 5 years, after which it must be updated in order to remain valid. There are many resources evaluated as part of an AUAR or any environmental review document. Land use, cover types, potential for required permits or approvals, and those can be at the federal, state, or local levels. Geology and grading, water resources, habitat and wildlife, potential for contamination at a site, potential for greenhouse gas or climate impacts, water and sewer infrastructure, the transportation network, historic properties, potential for visual, air, or noise impacts, and then the cumulative potential impacts not only from the study area itself, but also other surrounding development that may be occurring. All of those resources were evaluated for this project, and there were several mitigation measures identified. Some of the mitigation measures are on this in the next slide, but a full list is included in the final AUAR. Some of the mitigation measures identified include rezoning, several local, state, or federal permits that may be required by the project, the need for geotechnical investigations, and PDS compliance, which is stormwater compliance, extensions or upgrades to water and sanitary infrastructure, as well as well capacity planning and permitting, potential for impacts to water resources, and the need for stormwater treatment and wetland avoidance and impact minimization, use of wildlife-friendly erosion control blanket, tree clearing restrictions to avoid impacts to certain wildlife species, and the incorporation of native pollinator species into landscaping. Also included were soil and hazardous waste management compliance, visual design that would minimize impacts to insects and wildlife, dust control during construction, use of construction timing to minimize noise impacts, green or sustainable infrastructure design, and the use of composting or recycling as needed, and the need for intersection monitoring and potentially intersection improvements. The draft AUAR was sent out for review, and there were several comments received, some from agencies and some from residents. Agencies who commented included Dakota County, Department of Natural Resources, Metropolitan Council, and the Vermilion Watershed JPO. The comments primarily focused on the potential for implementing climate-friendly design features, the needs for future permitting and studies related to water resources, including surface water, groundwater, and utilities. These studies and permitting processes would address the potential for impacts and identify any specific mitigation measures necessary for resources such as wetlands, the Vermilion River, groundwater and aquifers resulting from water appropriation, and the needs for expanding utilities such as water and sanitary sewer. Other comments focused on considerations to minimize impacts to wildlife and their habitats, land use changes, and the potential for noise and visual impacts from lighting. All of the comments were considered in the final AUAR, which was distributed for the 10-day objection period in October, and no objections were received. Again, following adoption, the AUAR will remain valid for 5 years for the scenarios studied. All development within the study area would be covered by that environmental review if it fit within the scenarios studied. Developers and the city would review and implement mitigation measures as necessary. In addition to updating every 5 years, the AUAR would also potentially need to be updated if there was development proposed that was different or more impactful than the studied scenarios. Thank you for your time this evening, and I'd be happy to answer any questions on the AUAR process that council may have.
Thank you. Just as a point of clarity, as we look at a AUAR study, there are state agencies that essentially give you a pathway for a type of use that's intended. So in this case, there was 2 uses, right? And what they're doing is they're coming up with the mitigation strategy. So they're saying, if you do this, these things need to be done, right? If there's objection to water usage, fill in the blank, any number of the things, to where they don't feel, any agency feels that this or any project that has an AUAR done on it was viable, this is where they say it, correct?
Correct. So the objection period would be where they would say that if there is not a process currently in place through a regulatory program to address whatever the concern is, that's where the objection would come in.
And then ultimately, it is on the RGU or the local government unit that has to take that information, work with the developer through performance standards, contracts, all the things to ensure that those mitigations are handled, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Can local governments circumvent an environmental review? Can they say, I see the mitigation, I see what we're supposed to be doing, but we're gonna go outside of it. We're just gonna go well above and beyond what mitigation strategies are there, not address them. What oversight is there to prevent a local governing unit from completely disregarding an environmental review study?
So I guess the oversight would be in the regulatory agencies themselves. For many of the impacts, there are regulatory programs in place that would require review by other agencies in addition to or rather than the local government unit. And so in those cases, mitigation measures would also be implemented through those processes.
Thank you. Steve, any questions?
I do. And I want to thank John for the nice chat we had earlier. So we all read, especially with the DNR portion, which was pretty critical, but at the same time, I kind of felt like they were, I don't know, and this is kind of what I talked to John about. It almost felt like it wasn't really a comment towards Farmington. It felt like it was more of a regional, realization that, oh my gosh, we got activity in Rosemount and now in Farmington and, Apple Valley, and how are we going to manage the water resources? I mean, you're just looking at this right now, but do you feel like the Met Council and the DNR has a real good handle on kind of what's going on within our regional communities?
I do, and I think that's where some of those comments are coming from, and a restating of many of the requirements that they have already through their regulatory and permitting processes. So much of the DNR's comment was restating of what their water appropriations permit process is and what the city would be required to commit to and do in order to get more water appropriation than their permit currently allows.
Sure. That's all.
Katie?
I have none.
Holly?
I don't. No.
Nick?
And just to add on to that concept, right, that is true regardless of the development scenario. I read that as a
Correct.
comment of, hey, Farmington is growing, you're running into a sort of developmental wall with your current water appropriations, and you need to plan regardless of what the industry is or what the use case is. If you start building high-rise apartments, for instance, you're going to run into that wall, and they're telling you to address it now rather than later, right?
Correct, yep, that was a statement for both scenarios. It wasn't necessarily
Right.
directed at just the
That
one
is
for the text.
How I had understood that is, so if you showed industries on a comparative scale to each other, I mean, it's an equivalent statement either way, right? It's not specific to saying
Yes.
a data center will induce this thing on you necessarily.
Yes, it was just a statement that if additional water appropriation is needed, which it appears that it may be, that there was a process that needs to be followed to evaluate those potential impacts.
Understood. Thank you.
Actually, I do have a question. So obviously with an AUAR, we're studying a particular parcel of land, right? That's the whole purpose of doing this. But when we're talking about DNR in particular related to like water impact, shifting that space, like moving it a half mile to the east, a half mile to the west, is that likely to affect what the DNR is most concerned about, which is the overall water use for this particular area in general? Like when we're talking about Dakota County as a broader scope, does moving it one way or the other, like from a geographical standpoint, have a direct impact on their concern, or is it a greater scope of concern that is just something that we need to be mindful of overall anyway?
Sure, I can't answer that in detail, but generally speaking, when they're looking at groundwater impacts, it's going to be at more of a regional scale based on the aquifer and other groundwater resources. And so moving it a half mile east or west wouldn't necessarily change the scope of their review. They're reviewing it at a larger scale than that.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
I don't have any additional comments or questions beyond the ones I've asked. If there's anything else to add? If there's not, then I would seek a motion to approve Resolution 2024 TAC 97, adopting the final Alternative Urban Area-Wide Review, AUAR, for the Farmington Technology Park.
Motion to approve. Second.
Motion by Katie, second by Holly. Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Bernance,
Yes.
Councilmember Lean,
Yes.
Councilmember Wilson,
Yes.
Councilmember Burnjum,
Yes.
Mayor Hoyt.
Yes. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
All right, next action item under new business is item 12 TAC 2. 12 TAC 2 has three different items within it. So we have 12 TAC 2 TAC 1, which is the comprehensive plan amendments for the properties commonly known as Fountain Valley Golf Course and Angus. 12 TAC 2 TAC 2 is rezoning of the Fountain Valley Golf Course and property formerly known as the Angus property from B1 Highway Business, R1 Low Density Residential, R2 Low Medium Density Residential, R3 Medium Density Residential, Park and Open Space, and A1 Agriculture to MUCI Mixed Use Commercial Industrial, and 12 TAC 2 TAC 3, which is the preliminary plat and preliminary planned unit development for the Farmington Technology Park, Min LCO Farmington LLC, and Min LCO Farmington 2 LLC tract. All three of these items will be presented as one, and then separate motions will be made.
Correct.
Tony.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. The request this evening, as Mayor Hoyt had previously or just mentioned, include three items. The first would be a comprehensive plan amendment or amendments for the properties commonly known as Fountain Valley Golf Course and the Angus properties. The second is the rezoning of the Fountain Valley Golf Course and property formerly known as Angus property from B1, R1, R2, R3, Park and Open Space, and A1 to MUCI. And then the final action or the request this evening is the preliminary plat, preliminary plan unit development for the Farmington Technology Park, and that is by tract. Before we start, I think it's important that we kind of take a step back and talk about how we got to this point this evening. A little bit of history. The Fountain Valley Golf Course was annexed into the city on October 18th of 2006. There was a rezoning of the property from A1 to the mixture that is currently out there now, so the B1, R1, R2, R3, and Park and Open Space. That happened on January 16 of 2007. And then there was also a comprehensive plan amendment approved that same evening in 2007, guiding the Fountain Valley Golf Course from non-designated, being that it was annexed into the city, to low-density residential, low-medium density residential, medium-density residential, commercial, and parks and open space. Then since 2007, obviously we went through the recession, which paused and or stopped a number of planned or projected developments throughout the community and across the entire country. The city has rebounded and naturally occurring development patterns have shifted. We have seen a number of developments occur since then, including like Fair Hill Estate at North Creek, Regita Fields, Sapphire, Whispering Fields, Vita Tiva, Meadowview Preserve, Vermilion Commons, to name just a few. Additionally, CapEx line was installed roughly in 2013-2014 timeframe. With installation of this line, it did put Farmington on the map for large-scale power users due to access to the 345 kV line. And then some of the recent things, the city did decide in 2022 to update the overall comprehensive plan for the city to guide unguided land, plan for land annexed through the incorporation of Empire Township, and then to identify areas for additional business growth. Due to a number of constraints, including the amounts of property that are in the city that are enrolled in agricultural preserve and green acres, along with significant areas of wetland and floodplain, there is limited area to accommodate commercial and industrial inquiries. The Angus property was annexed into the city effective on April 24th of this year, at which time process started to re-guide, rezone, and to support future development. As I had mentioned, the 2040 citywide mid-cycle comprehensive plan, we did initially start that in 2022. It was paused for a couple months as there were some significant staff changes during that time. It was reinitiated in early 2023, again in response to accommodate for future commercial and industrial growth, and due to the annexation of approximately 570 acres of land that was part of that City of Empire Incorporation. The properties being considered tonight, those being Fountain Valley Golf Course and the Angus properties, were part of that mid-cycle amendment. However, due to working through some of the larger details of this larger amendment, that amendment was not ready to be processed at this time. And because of that, staff felt that was in the city's best interest to proceed with the amendments to the golf course and Angus properties separately. Which brings us to the various requests today for comprehensive plan amendments, again, for the Fountain Valley Golf Course, which would change the land use plan from a mixture of commercial low-density residential, low-medium density residential, medium-density residential, and park and open space to mixed-use commercial and industrial, and to change the anticipated development staging from post-2040 to 2020-2030. And then the second request regards to the Angus properties. There's 3 changes that would include for those. The first one is including the 3 parcels in the city's 2020 MUSA, which is our Metropolitan Urban Service Area. 2, land use plan change from non-designated to mixed-use commercial industrial. And 3, including these parcels in the 2020-2030 development staging timeframe. Now jumping to the rezoning request, again, we're looking at the Angus properties and the Fountain Valley Golf Course. For the Angus properties, being that the property was annexed into the city this year, it automatically came into the city as an A1 or agricultural zoning. The request is to rezone the 2 parcels from A1 to MUCI, mixed use commercial industrial. And then as far as the golf course, again, currently zone those mixtures of B1, R1, R2, R3, and park and open space. This request is to rezone that parcel to MUCI as well, which is mixed use commercial industrial. And just to note, data centers are permitted uses in the MUCI zoning district. As far as some of the surrounding land uses, there's agricultural uses to the north, low-density residential and agricultural uses to the east, those being in Castle Rock Township, industrial and low-density residential to the west, agricultural uses to the south. As far as the Farmington preliminary plat, Farmington Technology Park preliminary plat, the plat consists of 3 lots spread over just over 340 acres of land. Lot 1, Block 1 is 155 acres. It's the northern portion of the data center campus. Lot 2, Block 1 is 2.07 acres. This lot is proposed to be deeded to the city for various utility purposes. Lot 1, Block 2 is 185 acres. This is the southern portion of the data center south of 225th Street. With the preliminary plat, there's a 75-foot wide drainage utility and roadway trail easement provided along the eastern portion of Lot 1, Block 1 for the preservation of the future Biscayne Avenue corridor for Dakota County. Within your packet, there is what is referred to as a representative site plan. The site plan shows how the site could potentially be developed. It is subject to change based on the end user, if and when that is determined. Individual site plans will have to be reviewed and approved by the Planning Commission prior to any data center building and ancillary use on site is constructed. This review will ensure compliance with all aspects of an improved plan unit development and plat. There will be proposed design standards as part of the plan unit development. All site plans, again, would have to be in compliance with these standards as well. This is just a quick representation of the representative site plan. The one on the north shows the north campus, And the one on the right shows the southern campus as well. These site plans provide for up to 12 data center buildings and 2 administrative buildings between the north and south campuses. The square footage of the data centers on the north campus site is 1.6 million square feet and 933 square feet on the southern campus. Again, this is the most that could fit on that site, not necessarily representing what will actually be on the site. Building setbacks will be substantially greater than generally allowed in the MUCI district. The MUCI district allows for the following setbacks: front and side yard setback of 0 feet, rear yard setback of 20 feet. The proposed setback would be a minimum 250 feet from properties adjacent to residential uses and 150 feet from any property line adjacent to non-residential uses. That is what is currently being proposed. The applicant is proposing a 40-foot wide natural buffer, which would be around the majority of the perimeter of the site, with an intent to retain as many of the existing trees that are located in that buffer as practical. Additional berming up to 10 feet in height will also be placed within the natural buffer area to provide additional screening and visual aesthetics. Berming greater than 10 feet in height can be allowed with prior city approval as well. Perimeter fencing, they're proposing it up to 14 feet in height. It will also be provided fencing will be located outside of that natural buffer area. As far as the transportation and parking for anticipated accesses for the campus, the northern campus includes one access off of Minnesota 50 and one off of 225th Street West. The southern campus includes access off of 225th Street and Biscayne Avenue. The proposed development standards would require 1 parking space for each 1,000 square foot of office space. The parking spaces would not be required for the designated data hall areas, just the office spaces that would be provided for. The city will be requesting cash in lieu for parks instead of taking land with this particular plat application. This just shows the general land use plan for the overall campus. Again, the brown area generally shows the buildable area that's being proposed. As you can see on the southern portion of the campus, there's about 69 to 70 acres that is floodplain and or wetland. So, as far as the preliminary planned unit development, in your packet there are 14 various items that are up for discussion as far as what is being proposed for different design standards and requirements of that planned unit development. Everything from setbacks, natural buffers, landscaping, easement, general design standards, building height, fence height, electric utility lines, noise, parking, substations, private communication towers, maximum lot coverage, and lighting. In your packet, we have been working with the developer on a number of various items in regards to the PUD standards that are being proposed. So what we included in your packet and on your dais is an updated version of that reflects some additional enhancements that are being proposed. This is different than what was provided to the Planning Commission. The council does have the authority to change and modify those type of requirements that are brought from the Planning Commission to the City Council. What we'll do is we'll kind of go through these. The first one, again, is the setbacks. It deals with the 250 feet. The one thing that I do want to mention is that in the original there was a 1G, which dealt with the generators and mechanical equipment being exempt from building setback requirements. Tract has agreed to remove that from the language. So basically those would have to meet any setback that would be proposed. So As far as the natural buffer, this talks about the 40 feet from the perimeter, what they're looking to accomplish with those natural areas. The third is landscaping. The change that was put in there just, again, talks about the existing landscaping code that we have within the city. It does talk about berms being required to be constructed where development occurs adjacent to residential uses. It does talk about the berms over 10 feet in height, which may be allowed, again, subject to administrative site plan approval by the city. And then any berms approved with a site plan for a data center building not constructed prior to the first cannot be, and I'll read this verbatim. Any berms approved with a site plan for a data center building shall be constructed prior to the first foundation inspection for any building included in the associated approved site plan. Landscaping associated with the berm shall be installed during the Minnesota growing season. If construction of the berms are completed outside of that growing season, then all required landscaping shall be installed by June 1st of the subsequent growing season. And then we jump into number 4, the easement for the future county road. Talks about that 75-foot wide right-of-way, essentially. That would be placed adjacent to Lot 1. And then number 5 is where we get into the design standards. Specifically for principal building facades, should meet a certain number of standards, including for the purpose of principal building facade shall avoid the use of unilateral surfaces by including at least 2 of the following design elements. Those include change in building height, building step backs, projections and recesses, fenestration, changes in building material pattern, texture and color, use of accent material, overhangs, canopies, and porticos, arcades, and variations in the roof line as well. So those are all those things that we're looking to achieve as far as the design of the building itself. Now, ultimately, those will be reviewed as part of the site plan for each individual building. They're not being designed essentially this evening, so that would be something that would happen a little further down in the process. It talks about the screening of building mechanical equipment and critical infrastructure. The one thing I do want to mention here is that the rooftop mounted equipment would not exceed the overall of 80 feet in height, which is, again, the maximum height that they're looking to achieve with this development. Now, again, the 80 feet in height would be a step back approach. It would be 50 feet at the property line, and then there would be a calculation that would determine where they could place the 80-foot building, and typically that would be towards the center of the given lot that they're looking to build on. Fence height talks about the overall height, which would be increased to 14 feet. One of the areas that was added in this new, or this updated version is under 7.1. It is in locations where the existing fence will be relocated to the property line on the west side of the property boundary. Applicant shall provide adjacent property owners with the opportunity to collectively decide between 3 choices of fence material and design to include, but not limited to, wood, chain link, and metal. Applicant shall also replace any damaged landscaping resulting from the fence relocation as well. Then we jump to 8, electric utility lines. Basically outlines the, how and when those type of facilities will be brought to the various buildings. Noise generated from the site shall meet the applicable ordinance requirements as established by the MPCA. Prior to a site plan, applicant shall provide a noise study, which would have to demonstrate that the applicable noise levels will not be exceeded. And it also states that at the time of the site plan and building permit, review additional noise attenuation measures to ensure those compliance with rules are met, may be required as well. So there could be additional measures that would be needed depending on what that noise study comes back to say. Then we jump to 10, which is parking. Again, it talks about the 1 per 1,000 square feet of office space. Substations, it does talk about the type of equipment being outdoors, and that they'll have to be sufficiently screened. Private communication towers are permitted per these design standards and are subject to the building setback requirements. And then maximum lot coverage just talks about the developable area that was shown in the land use plan previously shown. And then 14 is a newly added section dealing specifically with lighting. It states that the maximum height of pole-mounted exterior lighting shall be 18 feet. All exterior lighting fixtures, including pole-mounted exterior lighting and building-mounted exterior lighting, shall be fully shielded with side shields and installed. Lighting shall not exceed 0.5 foot candles at the interior edge of the natural buffer area. As applicable, lighting that is exempt from these requirements includes temporary lighting and lighting provided for emergency and safety and security purposes as requested by the, or required by the building code. That the lighting of the building is prohibited. The maximum height of any building-mounted exterior lighting fixture shall be 35 feet in height, with the exception of motion-activated security lighting. So it places some standard on where those lighting fixtures can be located, height, shielding, things like that. So again, those were all things that were put in place to enhance those design standards. As far as the Planning Commission review, the Planning Commission did review and recommend approval of the preliminary plat and planned unit development for the Farmington Technology Park, along with the rezoning of the parcels at the September 10th regular meeting, and they recommended approval with a vote of 5-0. The Planning Commission did review again and recommend approval of the comprehensive plan amendments at their October 8th regular meeting with a vote of 4-0 as well. That leads us to the action as requested this evening. By separate action, approve the following. First, adopt resolution 2024-98, adopting the comprehensive plan amendments for the properties commonly known as Fountain Valley Golf Course and the Angus properties, and authorize the submittal of the amendments to the Metropolitan Council. 2, adopt ordinance 2024-11, rezoning the properties commonly known as Fountain Valley Golf Course and Angus properties. And 3, adopt resolution 2024-99, approving the preliminary plat and preliminary plan unit development for the Farmington Technology Park.
Thank you, sir. Who, let's back up here real quick, because there's a lot there. There's a lot in the 3 items. And I want to make sure that we address them with questions and/or statements by piece, okay? So what I'm going to ask is that the first thing we do is let's go into the first item, which would be 12, TAC 2, TAC 1, which is the comprehensive plan amendment. And we'll start with any questions or statements there. And then we'll move into the second part, which would be the rezoning, and then we'll move into questions or statements around the preliminary plat and the planned unit development. After we go through and we've had our questions and our statements, at that point, we would look and address each action item individually, okay? That way, we don't start asking questions about the PUD and the plat, and then we go back to the zoning or the comp plan. So let's gather our questions and our statements around the first item being the comprehensive plan amendment.
And Mayor, if I may?
Yes.
We do have the track team available here as well. We also have John Byer from Dakota Electric here, if there are specific questions to electricity or anything like that as well. So just wanted to make you aware of that.
Before we start real quick, I just want to make one quick statement slash question, and that's timeline, okay? You did a very good job articulating, how things have happened getting up to this point. What is the timeline going forward? So we talk about preliminary plats, preliminary PUDs. We know that there's development contracts, there's final plats, final PUDs. Like, will you just generally speaking give an outline of what the process looks like moving forward?
Sure. Sure. Yeah, if this does get approved this evening, they will have to go and get a final plat approved through the Planning Commission and City Council, along with a development contract and final PUD. Depending on what happens tonight, that could go to Planning Commission as soon as their regular meeting in November for a recommendation. Ultimately, that then comes to council for your final review and decision. Then once that is done, if that's approved, plat is recorded, development contract recorded. At that point, they could at any time come in for a site plan review, which would be ran through the Planning Commission to ensure that all of those design standards that have been established are being met. And those do get approved through just the Planning Commission. Those would not get, that's not a recommendation to the City Council. That would be approval by the Planning Commission. So in theory, they would like to have all of their entitlements, so being the final plat, development contract, all of that approved by the end of the year. We do still need to, if the comprehensive plan amendment is approved, run that through the Metropolitan Council for adoption. That would get submitted to them probably within a week or two, if approved. And at that point, they typically have about a 60-day window to review those, so.
Okay. Thank you for that clarity. Steve?
Yeah, Mayor, the way you outlined the process sounds reasonable. The question I have is, Tony, based on what you presented, this sounds like this kind of fits into number 3 of our three-part discussion. So if we have questions on what was just presented, we would talk about that under number 3. Correct.
We won't take any action. I'm not going to seek any motions until we've gone through all 3 of the items. But I want to make sure that we keep them.
Okay.
So if there's comp plan amendment questions, let's keep them there. Then let's go into the rezoning questions. Then let's go into the preliminary plat and PUD. That way, no, we're not doubling up on each other or anything.
Yep, fair enough.
Okay. We'll start with you then. Do you have any questions or statements regarding the comprehensive plan amendment?
Sure, I will. I guess I was probably prepared more for the kind of take them as a one lump group, but I can do it that way. I am going to make one comment at the front end, and I do not want this to go on the community pages. I don't want this to go in the newspaper. This is me just telling you about me right now. I really don't want to be here tonight. My father is dying. He has anywhere between right now and maybe a week to live. So if I become emotional in some way, shape, or form, it really has probably less to do with our decision than just me being a son who's fortunate enough to be 56 and still have a dad with us. And I'm just going to say this, we all have family, We all have loved ones who have gone through any number of struggles. I mean, I am blessed that my dad made it to 89. He certainly will not see another birthday. He's dying of dementia. But I'll tell you what, if you could talk to me right now, I'd say, well, you absolutely go to that city council meeting. And I don't miss a city council meeting unless something, significant comes up. So I don't want that in the community pages. It's just Steve being Steve. We all have life going on. All right, so the reason I wanted the council to consider the moving of the comprehensive plan is, all of you know, as council is aware, we had a first kind of glance at the interim comprehensive plan, which, huge kudos to Deanna and to Tony, and I think staff was probably involved too. A lot of input has occurred with regard to the necessity of looking at a revised comp plan. And really the key areas that that plan looked at was kind of the area along Flagstaff. Some of those, current agricultural areas to say, if they weren't agricultural, what else could it be? So we have that in process. To me, while I agree with, the comments made earlier about considering those separately, I think it is relevant because we are talking about a significant change to the comprehensive plan to, let's kind of put everything on the table and kind of look at it at one time to see what it looks like. Based on what I've seen, there's some parts of that I find very, very appealing. There's other parts that are very concerning with kind of that initial look at it. And if anyone in this room hasn't seen it, the comp plan proposal, that's kind of our first look at it, shows not only the area that we are talking about tonight, but also shows the whole southern quadrant of the annexed area to be of a similar use. So, what would be the safest way to say it? If you're a business owner or a resident in that area, theoretically, if the comp plan were to stay as it looks in this proposal, you could theoretically be boxed in by, mixed use, commercial, industrial, or similar in that whole area. Now, to me, that's personally concerning. So, as I look at the comprehensive plan, and look, Tony did a nice job of pointing that part out. The last time the city had this level of, and maybe it's just my luck, but the last time the city had this much controversy over a comprehensive plan amendment was the high school siting. I literally had moved to Farmington about a year before voting on that. And, you can imagine the fear of, oh my gosh, what do I do with this? But the difference between that situation in 2005-06 and today is the comprehensive plan had a institutional use already called out for it. So really, it was incumbent upon the Planning Commission and the City Council to essentially follow through with that. Of course, there was a lot of other stuff that happened, litigation, et cetera, between the city and school, bad chapter in our city's history, but that went on. So as I look at our comprehensive plan, and again, all of us have seen up here, and as well as the Planning Commission, have seen our guiding principles, what we believe as a city, what we want the city to look like, to be connected, to have strong neighborhoods, to have a strong park system, you think about it and you think about a fabric of a quilt, and it's all kind of put together, and it works, and it works well. When I think about this type of development in the comprehensive plan amendment, this does not work. This just flat out doesn't work. And I was initially, I liked this isn't that big of a deal. But I think what really changed my mind, and I tried really hard not to let it change my mind, was our trip to Iowa. So there's a lot of things, all of us were looking to see different things. What kind of sound is, what kind of traffic, what do the buildings look like? The thing that stuck out to me was what I didn't see. So we went to the Apple Data Center in Waukee. It's along Hickman Road. For anybody who's been down there, been to Living History Farms, run down there, whatever, but Waukee is blowing up. This Apple Data Center sits literally in the middle of nowhere. Now, it is going to have stuff around it by developer choice, which might include residential, but they will choose to move to that area. So what struck me was the only thing nearby that data center was Hickman Road, the Westerly Road, and I think a church that had probably been around for 100 years in the northeast corner of an adjacent parcel. And when I envision a data center and the comprehensive plan with a data center, it's not in the middle of a neighborhood. It's in a area that is zoned away from areas which have homes and maybe smaller businesses. So as I look at this comprehensive plan, yes, all of us might arrive at a different place, and we're all going to have our opinions for arriving at a different place. For me, I cannot support a comprehensive plan with this type of use so adjacent and so close to our neighborhoods. And I might say this in the next section, I feel like a data center needs quote-unquote room to breathe. You know, they're big honking facilities. And, you know, we can all be critical of how much we or our kids or the future relies on artificial intelligence. I mean, the Department of Energy and multiple different sources I've read point to as much as 9% of our U.S. electrical production, 9%, it's a really big number, is going to be directed towards data center energy consumption. So energy and water are obviously big factors. And I want an attractive facility to be here in Farmington. You know, Tract is doing their job. You know, they're doing what they need to do. It's our job as a council to say, you know, we appreciate you, but we don't think this site makes sense. We need you. You know, we can't tell them where to go either. So it's not our job to say, you go here. You know, that's a landowner private property rights issue. But as it relates to the comprehensive plan, I would not be able to support that.
Okay,
No.
nothing? Holly?
Actually, I'd like to start first by asking just a question so that for those that are not familiar with the process, so that we can understand the difference between a comprehensive plan amendment and the way that it relates to the rezoning request. How are they connected, and then how are they separate in this instance?
Generally speaking, your comprehensive plan will be a higher level of like the 40,000 foot view of things. Whereas in rezoning, you get into the things that deal with things like bulk standards, so your height, setbacks, uses, whether it's permitted, conditional, things like that. So generally speaking, you want the two things to be in concert with each other. But really that's the difference. The comprehensive plan is more of a generalized, higher level review of things, and then you get into the nitty gritty, the dirt, if you will, with the zoning.
And if I may, Tony, I would just add on, it's important that that's why these items are coming together, right? Because the zoning needs to be supported by the comp plan and vice versa, so.
Right, and I appreciate it because from the outside looking in, it looks like you're asking to do the same thing twice, right?
Yeah.
So when you look at this, as far as the comprehensive plan is concerned, for those that aren't familiar with how the process unfolds, it looks like we are asking for a comprehensive plan update that essentially is exactly the same as the rezoning update, or the rezoning request. And so I just for me, I think it was, you know, important to point that out. Where I believe I want to start with this is first of all to say that I have the utmost respect for every person that I sit next to up here, regardless of whether or not we ultimately end up feeling the same way at the end of this discussion. I have deep respect for Steve and for Katie and for Mayor Hoyt and for Nick in the work that I know that they have independently done. Because I know that for me, this is not a decision that comes lightly. It's not something that I just haphazardly stumbled into here tonight without concern, without reservation, without thought, without research, without reading and listening and watching and attending at every opportunity. As it relates to, comprehensive plan amendment, the way that I see a comprehensive plan is as a strategic document. The purpose for it for me is not that it's ever something that's set in stone. Its intention is for vision, but the purpose of it is the framework for decision-making. And the point also is it's not that it can't be adjusted. So that's where I have to consider, where my moral, philosophical, and ethical obligations are, especially when there is a decision that, based on my research, is going to be one that benefits a majority of residents while definitely impacting a small number as well. And the thing is that my responsibility is in making decisions that maximize the overall well-being of the greatest number of people. But that doesn't mean that the impact gets to be disproportionate. It means that it has to be understood, that it has to be thought out, that it has to be considered. And so, one of the things that comes up is that wide breadth of area, and do we have it? And I'm not seeing that as what's available for Farmington. I'm seeing an opportunity where there's a private land owner and a private developer that are interested in an agreement, and I have to ask the very difficult question of, is this the right space for this particular project? And while there are several types of development scenarios that could be discussed, I don't have the ability to travel back in time, nor do I have a crystal ball. And so I am of the opinion that I do see this as reasonable. I look at what exists currently along Highway 3 as far as the commercial footprint that's there. I look at what is along Highway 50 and seeing that there's industrial use there. And I realize that it's not something that is exciting. It's not something that is pretty, but it also doesn't step outside of the scope of what is reasonable with proper time, attention, and mitigation efforts.
That's very well stated. I would say in a similar way, I've heard this complaint numerous times that there's plenty of land in Farmington. There's plenty of land in Farmington. Tony made a comment here showing how there is a surprisingly limited amount of commercial land available in this town due to things like the ag preserve. Are people impacted by a change like this? Yes, they are. I'm not going to diminish that for anybody here. Things are changing. We don't have all the answers. We're working through that. But to say it goes here versus Flagstaff versus 50, you can always draw that circle within Farmington. This is not that big of a city. Someone will be impacted by a change this big. So is there breathing room? I generally do not believe that there is. And this is the best opportunity in front of us with what we have today.
That's it. Tony, I want to go back a little bit as it pertains to the comp plan. You had mentioned how the area in question, Fountain Valley and the let's start with the Fountain Valley Golf Course parcel, right? Annexed in 2005, 2006, right? Somewhere in there. At the time, and as with any elected official, anyone who sits here, you have to make the best decision you can with the information you have in front of you at the time. It's the best you can do. You have to make the decision based on what's in front of you. You can speculate, you can hope, and I believe that roughly 20 years ago, the people that sat here, or technically wasn't sitting in this building, but the people at the time thought based on market demand, based on the development of a few areas, things were going to happen in a certain way. There were outside extenuating circumstances, a recession, things that changed that. And then we fast forward to the conversations we've had in the last 6 to 12 months. And we've been talking about the comp plan in general. And I'm going to sidestep here for a second. The reason I asked to go back is we started the visioning component, the update to the comp plan. We had a change in some staff, and then there was a AUAR that was commenced on the aforementioned Bengal project area, right?
Correct.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but because that AUAR started, we could not at that time update the comp plan.
That's correct.
We couldn't.
Well,
matter-
we could run through our process.
We could run
of
through our
it,
process.
but
We
the
could
Met
not
Council-
submit
Correct.
what
Met
we had.
Council would not review.
So we start working on something, then an AUAR commences on a different parcel, stops we can do our work internally, but it can't go to Met Council. The official action can't be taken on it. In the meantime, this project in question pops up, right? So now we're forced to sit back and go a little bit deeper, which brings me back to the last few months. We've talked a lot in work session about how this community has changed. And one of the things that gets missed often is where Farmington actually exists. We have a municipal boundary. The address of Farmington doesn't mean the municipal boundaries of Farmington. We've grown up in the community. We all call it community. We all call it the greater Farmington area. It's the Farmington area public schools for the longest time. That's what we've referred it to. There's people that live 4 miles south of Belzers in Lakeville that live with a Farmington address. So often the thought is, I see all this stuff that's in Farmington, and realistically, it's not. When you look at the municipal boundary of Farmington, it is significantly smaller than what we think it is. When you start to overlay what's in Ag Preserve, what's in Green Acres, the size of the parcels, 80, 100, 120 plus acres per parcel, it's not as easy as just chopping things up and saying it should go here, 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 and here. It makes it very difficult to master plan or put together an effective comprehensive plan because you're talking about significant size of parcels. We're working with the information that we have today. And here, months ago, this project lands in front of us, right? Is it ideal? No, it's not ideal. But it doesn't need 100% to make it permissible. We, as elected officials, have to make decisions for all of the residents of Farmington. All of them. Every single one of them. Because our police, our fire, our public works, our city services go to all of the residents of Farmington. We don't have to like it. We don't have to agree with it. But that's the reality of what we have in front of us. We talked about, it's mentioned often about process, right? When our city administrator was hired 2+ years ago, the first action item she had was to commence on a development review process. We had to figure out, why was the city of Farmington always the second tier or third option? Why were we not being considered for larger developments, other residential opportunities? And you know what we heard from the people who are actually writing the checks wanting to do the development? You're difficult to deal with. Why? Because arbitrary decision-making was happening. We, the elected bodies at the time, over time, were making arbitrary decisions about what was or was not in the best interest of this community. We can't do that. Whether we like a project or not, we have to allow it to go through the process. To circumvent that process, or to think that early on, without allowing it to go through the proper process, we are making arbitrary decisions. And that's not what any elected body in any community should do. For us to stand up and say no 6 months ago devoids any development opportunity of the opportunity to go through and see if the project is even viable. With that, are there any additional comments as it pertains to the comprehensive plan update? Seeing none, we'll move on to the second item, which is the rezoning of the golf course and the property formerly known as the Angus property. Katie, any questions or comments?
No.
Holly?
No.
Nick?
I do want to read a couple notes on this one. You know, I've heard comments to the effect of the spot zoning claim. I do just want to go on kind of a public record as saying that I do not find grounds for this. You can make a fairly reasonable argument that as you drive out of town from 3 on 50, the entire south side of 50 is already commercial today. It cannot be considered unreasonable to think that continuing along a commercial strip in that regard is any sort of arbitrary decision. It is. What's that?
Hang on.
Okay.
We're gonna, hold on a
Non-residential,
second.
forgive me.
We're gonna maintain decorum.
You know, like you said, I'm gonna leave. Like you said before, if we don't like it, we can move out of Farmington. You already made up your mind anyway, that's wrong. You already made up your mind. All of you wasting your time. Well, let me take some time to vote for him not to go.
Go ahead, Nick.
That was actually all I wanted to say on that particular spot zoning topic, was just as far to rezoning.
I don't have any questions or comments as it pertains to the rezoning. Steve?
Yeah, actually, I just had one comment on this item, so, and I think it's, you know, again, could this have been talked about in the previous item? Sure. You know, the rezoning, you know, there's a couple parts to this, because you could say, well, you know, private property rights, which we value in this country, very much, similar to free speech, similar to owning a gun and all that, private property rights is tremendously important. The distinction here, though, is, and I do want to point this out, that the landowner has went into an agreement with the developer contingent upon all these approvals. And so obviously that's why the rezoning needs to occur, is to enable this to, you know, for this to indeed happen. If the, you know, if the zoning, let's say that this was going to be housing, for example, R1, R2, R3, there would really not need to be a rezoning. It would just be a sale that would have already occurred. So I just wanted to simply point out that, you know, the city or that that the private property right component is obviously very important, but it needs to occur to effectuate this change, so.
All right. We'll move on to the third item, which is the preliminary plat and preliminary planned unit development. Nick?
No comment.
Nothing? Okay. Holly?
Good, this is where I have lots of comments. So one of the things that I want to talk about a bit with regard to this is really where the conversation about my appreciation for what it is to be a resident that has committed to coming to our meetings for the last several months. And what I can only view as being what it's like to be on that side. I've been on that side actually once before, and I remember standing there myself and thinking that I was talking, you know, for several minutes at a time, usually longer than what was probably supposed to be allowed. And it was a bunch of blank stares up here, and there was no opportunity in that moment for conversation. There was no opportunity for connection, and I can only all too well understand how unnerving that can be, to feel as though the things that you're saying are not being heard. And in this situation, this is where I want to be very clear that I have listened to every comment that has been made. I have read every article that's been submitted. I have watched every video. I have spoken with people across the country, both those that I've sought out myself and and those that have been recommended by residents here. And I am so deeply grateful to every single person for doing that, because there were a lot of really good points that were brought up, and they were brought up in a mess of emotion, but they were brought up and it led to what I really feel were some positive things that have come out, particularly for me with the PUD. And this is something that I spent a good amount of time digging into, and I'm sure Kristen was a little bit annoyed, or not annoyed, maybe surprised would be the better word, by how much I dug into this one. And so I know Tony went over this, but one of the things that was really important to me was scratching G, which for those that hadn't seen it was the idea that the generators or mechanical equipment were exempt from the building setback requirements. As I said before, when there's a process like this in front of us, and the mayor mentioned it too, I'm not sitting here loving this. Somebody asked me, would you want it in your backyard? And I said I wouldn't be thrilled at the idea, and that's not a lie. I wouldn't be thrilled at the idea. And I also said that I don't have the luxury of making a decision in a way that is equal to what I may or may not be thrilled about. I have to make a decision outside of my own emotion. I have to make a decision that is for all of the city of Farmington. And with that in mind, one of the things that I was very specifically intent on was making sure that I understood that the PUD as it was proposed could very well be the end. And if I wasn't willing to accept that as a possibility, then I wouldn't be able to put anything behind it. And so seeing that the setbacks and line G being scratched, that was incredibly important to me, because it means that generators and mechanical equipment are not exempt from the setback requirements. One of the other things that we discussed was just some ambiguity around what would be sufficient coverage for screening, or where rooftop equipment fell into the scope of height requirements. And I'm also pleased to see that there have been some updates in there regarding that terminology. One question I do want to ask actually has to do with buffers, and I think, Kristen, we had talked about this, so you might be able to speak a little bit more on this one. When we discussed berms, I know that we had talked about some information related to particularly my feeling that if we were going to put this in this particular space, that berms next to residential were incredibly important, and I appreciate that language. I'm wondering about the security fencing. That was a conversation that we had a little bit more recently. And if there is the possibility of another adjustment where security fencing would fall to the inside rather than to the outside of the perimeter, so that for our residents, as they're experiencing this change, what they're not seeing is a security fence and then a whole bunch of natural buffer behind it, but in fact the reverse of that. Can you, okay.
Thank you. I'm Kristen Dean with Tract. Holly, you did bring up a very good point in the distinction between essentially perimeter fencing and security fencing. And so we have a situation where along the east and west property lines, there are there would be the fencing that would separate the property from the adjacent properties. And in that situation, we have added in additional PUD standards that commits the developer to work with the property owners where the existing fence is along the western property line. It's interior to the site. And when that fence is relocated to the property line, that the developer is committed to working with those property owners to establish a style of fence that works for them. So it would ideally be a collective decision between those residents so that there's a uniform fence design there, but that's more of a residential style fence. Security fencing is intended to be closer into the site. So truly it is around the building, it's around the parking areas, and so you would have security fencing interior to the site and then the natural buffer. and then the adjacent properties. And so we can add language in, and we can codify that with the final PUD that distinguishes between the security and the perimeter fencing, but something along the lines of the security fencing may not be installed within the natural buffer, so that puts it on the interior of the site. And then fencing along the property line, something to the effect of shall not exceed 7 feet unless otherwise approved by the city. And we can talk through what that standard might look like so that it's more of a residential style fence, because I believe that's the objective that you're trying to meet. Is that at the property line and 40 feet in, has more of a natural feel. And then security fencing, which can be up to 14 feet, would be on the inside of that natural buffer interior to the site.
Okay. Yeah, and I don't know what that looks like from a process for tonight. Leah, can you speak maybe a little bit more to that?
Yes, we can do kind of as directed if other members of the council, if there's some consensus there, or with the motion to approve the resolution, you can say with language separating security fence from residential fence.
Okay. I don't know if that's something that's worth discussing now, or if we come back to that.
Leah. Football's thrown over the fence. Me and my son out there playing football. What happens then? Hey, football is next time. Can I go? Can I jump the fence and go get it?
There.
Leah, correct me if I'm wrong, but if so Holly has brought up the point about the fence. If any of my peers want to comment about the fence, then basically we're directing staff to work with the developer to say, this is the direction that we want to see it go. And then that way it's on the record, they've got it, and then depending on how the vote goes, they're using that as the language to, they're using that as the direction to ultimately make the necessary amendments to take back to the planning commission for further discussion to update. Is that fair?
If I'm comfortable with that, Tony, do you have any problems with that?
No, that would be fine, and if any of those changes that the council want to see, that those would be added to that final PUD, at that time be reviewed by the planning commission and ultimately the council.
Okay. As long as we have a running list of things that we're talking about.
Okay, I'm good with that.
It's out of decorum, I apologize, but maybe the same thing could apply to the 1,000-foot buffer or setback on the two residential sides.
Let us work through, because we knew that I had the assumption that the preliminary plat, the PUD, the standards were going to be an extensive conversation point. And there are multiple things that are going to get talked about, and I want to make sure that we can all drop our points on it, get some feedback from the developer, city staff, and legal, and then ultimately come up with, we'll call it a hot list or whatever it may be, right? Keep going.
One of the other things that I was looking at underneath general design standards, and I appreciate the desire to include at least 2 design elements. I would like to add, as an addition to that, the possibility of faux windows. This was actually something that I was discussing for quite a bit of time with different people in different areas, and Mr. Turner out in Loudoun County had brought that up as an addition that might be worth considering just from a visual aesthetic standpoint. So underneath principal building facades, when it talks about the 2 of the following design elements, visually, from an aesthetic standpoint, we're talking about change in building height, step backs, it's 5A and II, to add in there like faux windows as one of the other opportunities for a more visually appealing and aesthetic presentation to the buildings.
Could you clarify your intent behind full windows?
Faux.
Faux windows.
As in visually appealing from the outside, not necessarily usable from the inside.
I got it. Thank you.
Can I just ask a point of information here? Are we designing standards on the fly, or are we talking about, and I appreciate your comments, but I just want to make sure that I just want to make sure that I know if we're talking about our thoughts on this particular item or if we're designing standards here at the dais.
Leah,
And I'm not trying to sound critical, but that's how I feel like we're the direction we're going here.
Yeah, I guess in short, both. Now to discuss design, according to kind of what we've talked about, where we're talking about it all first. Now would be the time to discuss those conditions that the council's looking for as a part of the PUD approval. Does that answer your question, Councilmember Wilson?
Yeah, we're not going to,
It does, but what concerns me is we've got a body of experts called the Planning Commission that are very adept at design and development standards. And I would be very uncomfortable from my seat saying, you know, and Holly brought up some great points, but there could be other points that the Planning Commission may want to bring up, and this is the concern I have about approving the preliminary plat, because once you get the process in motion, then to come back and say, well, we missed that one, or we missed this one, or the height's not quite high enough, or the berm's not quite right, or the setback. It's just all that minutia that more time gives you, and that's my broadest concern.
so we would treat this, imagine it was a residential development coming up, right? We have a preliminary plat and a PUD. We're not going to get into a 4-hour conversation about the development contract and start defining all of the fine-tuned details. But we do have to take the feedback that we've heard from our residents, the things that we've heard from the developer. There are some bullet points that we, as a council, should address and provide guidance to our team in the event of approval. So no, we don't want to get into the weeds. However, if setbacks is a thing, high level, if individually there are concerns, we provide direction to our team. They'll go back, work with the Planning Commission, the developer, ultimately comprise a final PUD and bring it forward for approval after it's gone through all the other steps.
Sure.
Right. I won't get further into the weeds on that. For me, and to your point, Steve, I appreciate where you're at with this. I wanted to clarify that there were some very baseline things that I thought were important to have at this point, so that I at least had that much put into it before it went to another step, if that's the direction that it ends up going. I appreciate the language around fully screening rather than the more subjective version of sufficient coverage. And also just clearing some of the language around how high different elements and structures on the site can be. I know that that's been a concern that I've heard repeatedly, is the size and scale. And so ensuring that there's no aspect of the structure that can go above what is already, you know, set higher than other standards. So I definitely appreciate that. One of the things I wanted to clear up, and I don't know if this is a question that you can answer, Kristen, and I know we've discussed it, but I think it's important for residents. When we're talking about noise mitigation, one of the conversations that I've had and points of feedback that I've received is, even with the centers that I've visited, they're not the size, and they're not the same size. Like visually, in scale, in what they're using for power and all of that, that we are not having an apples to apples comparison. And I understand that that's true. Like in our area here, we don't have that particular thing to have. But when it comes to noise, my understanding, and this is where I need you to correct me if I'm wrong, is that the limitations set up by the Environmental Protection Agency, the 60 to 65 decibels daytime, the 50 to 55 decibels nighttime, that is regardless of size and scale. Yes. So if we were to build this out, and if it were to be 3 buildings, it is still at the lot line 60 to 65 decibels, 50 to 55 at night. If I have 12 buildings, the way that this is potentially presented, the 12 buildings don't change that number. So while visually the scale is very different, audibly the scale cannot go above those standards that are set. Is that right?
That is
that
correct.
Not right?
Yes, it applies. Yes, all noise generated from this site, from any uses on this site, cannot exceed the noise standards at the property line for that adjacent use. And so the noise standards that you listed are for the residential noise levels that cannot be exceeded. And so yes, regardless of use and scale, that is the ceiling.
Okay. All right, I appreciate that. If there's anyone else that can talk a little bit, and I'm not sure, for me, this would have to do with some of the concerns that had come up regarding electrical use and the grid build-out. So I don't know that that's necessarily you, but I know that we do have a representative from Dakota Electric here, yes? Yes.
Good evening, Mayor Hoyt, council members. John Byer, Vice President of Energy and Member Services for Dakota Electric. Lots of things that have been said about the electrical facilities going in. I can address some of them. First, I want to talk about reliability. I've watched all the videos of the previous meetings. I've heard concerns about rolling blackouts, et cetera, et cetera. Anytime you build any project, doesn't matter this size, a new subdivision, we have to study the grid and make sure the grid can handle the project that's proposed. And so for this particular project, the studies that have been done, we've already completed a system impact study. System impact study looks at the transmission grid. In this particular case, the 345 line that runs along the southern edge of the project, to determine if the transmission system can handle the project. That was completed late spring, early summer. From there, you go into the facility study. Facility study is kind of your next phase. It's a list of identifies the assets that are specifically needed to serve the project. This has just been completed. We're working with the project applicants on finalizing this. So far, we've reached no roadblocks. Where do we go from here? From here, next we go to MISO, which is the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator. This is the regional transmission operator for 15 U.S. states and Manitoba. They will be looking at this project. This will become part of their 2025 planning year. They will also, like the regulatory bodies of Minnesota, they will weigh in on this. Can the grid, from a regional standpoint, from Louisiana to Manitoba, will this project negatively affect the grid? Will it cause reliability issues? We will get a decision out of them probably April, May of 2025. So far, the grid is stable. We can handle this. There is 17 to 18,000 megawatts in the state of Minnesota. This is a very small percentage of that. And so the grid can handle the project. Other things to talk about that have been mentioned. It was mentioned on my way up here. Certainly the vision or the perception that there's a windfall for the utility that's involved. Dakota Electric, we are not for profit, member owned. What does that mean? Is that any profits we make off of this project, any load we serve, is returned to the member owners that own us. Checks will be going out in December called capital credit checks. Those are from profits we made in 2005, 2006. There is not a windfall for the utility. In fact, I would like to address what it means for the ratepayers. The ratepayers, this can be a good thing for the ratepayers. And why is that? We certainly understand the visual aspects. I'm not here to talk on the land use. I understand that's very difficult. But what can this mean for the ratepayers? The utility is not going to be spending, these are round numbers, $50 million on the infrastructure to serve this load. You, the members of Dakota Electric, will not be spending $50 million to serve this load. The developer will pay their own way. And so what's that mean for you and why does that benefit you? So the developer pays all the infrastructure costs, but yet they're going to be paying the same rates that you pay. And so we will not have the outlay of the infrastructure needed to serve this. They'll pay their own way, but we'll be collecting more, what you would refer to as profits. We call them margins. And so the margins will increase, which will help us have stable rates. Somebody brought up Xcel earlier. Dakota Electric, we're about 20% less than Xcel. For those that read the press, Xcel just went in for another rate increase on November 1st. That differentiates between Dakota Electric and Xcel will continue to be there. Dakota Electric hasn't had a general rate increase since 2019. We cannot go much further. We will probably have a rate increase in 2025, but we will still maintain that separation between us and Xcel. And so I just wanted to address that from a ratepayer standpoint, that this can be a good thing from a ratepayer standpoint on for those that are members of Dakota Electric. Certainly, we, like I said, we're not here to weigh in on the land use, but we have an obligation to serve while maintaining our promise of service to each of you that have come before this project. What's our promise to serve? Safe, reliable, affordable. We're not going to hook up a project that's going to jeopardize any three of those. We've been around since 1937. We want to be around another 100, 150 years to serve the residents of Farmington, for the four founders that founded us in 1937. Member-owned, member-operated. And so thank you for taking a few minutes on a soapbox there, but I wanted to clarify a few things that I heard on the videos I watched. Be happy to take any other questions, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir.
I wasn't specifically connected to any part of 14, though I definitely appreciate that information being added with regard to lighting. I know that that was another concern that was expressed by residents and was something that individuals in Eagle Mountain had discussed as well, that as a dark sky community, lighting that was not intrusive was incredibly important, and they were able to keep that, so I appreciate that being added in there. I'm gonna pause for now. That doesn't mean I might not have more, but I feel good about where I'm at in this moment. We'll allow this to move forward.
Nick?
I had no comment earlier.
Just
I do
come back.
appreciate the
Time
time you took. That lighting thing, I think, was a result of our discussion. I appreciate the language you added to it. It is very important to me to not have, at least attempt to not have lights going into people's houses when you're at final build out.
Katie?
I would say my ability to sit here tonight and be silent and listen to everybody and ask their questions is because of the faith that I've put in our city staff and our planning commission, who have done a lot of the legwork to get us here to this point. It doesn't matter what I ask tonight or what suggestions I make for those of you who are sitting in this room. All you want to see is us vote against this. And so I will reserve my comments out of respect for all of you, because I also have a lot of respect for this council, who's done an extreme amount of legwork, as many of you have as well, to cast their votes tonight. So don't think of me being silent up here as not listening to you and not having done the work behind the scenes, but I think you would all agree, it doesn't matter the questions that we ask the individuals that come up here. If we don't vote against this, it's not going to win any of you over in this room.
Steve?
Thank you, Katie, for saying that, and Holly, thank you, and my apologies for kind of barging it in your time space there. I do think, I do want to comment on that, because I did want to address Tony and Deanna. We have, and actually, I don't think there may be a full appreciation of this, but Tony has a long history with the city, and Tony, you do an A1 job. If I was starting my own company tomorrow, you'd be one of the first people I'd hire. You're a good person, you're honest, and you do a good job. And quite frankly, you've been beaten up so often during this process. I told Lynn, it was about 2 or 3 months ago, I actually left the meeting angry that I didn't defend you, in the sense of, I don't want to see our staff being beaten up. And to you, Deanna, an amazing job that you do for the city too. I'm probably not going to agree with your recommendation, but it doesn't mean that I don't appreciate all of you as my peers and you two as well. I do. So obviously the other parts I'm concerned about, and I don't want to be Mr. Wordy. My wife actually told me to make notes and stick to them. So sorry, honey, I didn't do that. But the preliminary plat is actually one of the areas I'm a little bit more concerned about. And of course, we've got, a number of items that came up today. And this particular item, it's probably all going to be voted the same way, but I would really like to see us consider delaying this portion, because I really think it's imperative that we allow the Planning Commission to weigh in on this. And quite frankly, we're all familiar with design standards, but there's design standards for, businesses we're familiar with, or housing developments that we're generally familiar with. This is brand new territory. So if this gets approved tonight, we are talking about development and design standards that really I would argue, are not well articulated in our code, unless I'm mistaken. I mean, they're not articulated to the same way that they might for other types of development. We're going to have standards in there for mixed use, commercial industrial, but how well does it apply to a technology park? I'm not sure that it does. And I know that we are planning to have a discussion with the Planning Commission coming up here. And I really think that even if the rest of us, even if I'm the only one that doesn't agree with the big picture of this, I really think we'd be wise to at least hold on to take a little bit more careful analysis of the preliminary plat, because as we know, when we set the project in motion, it's in motion. And there's going to be a lot of twists and turns and changes. We know that. And the other component of this is we know that this is a representative sample or a representative look at what it might look like. So, we've got 11 to 12 buildings that are situated in certain ways. What if they're situated differently? What if, what if there's a determination about land use in a certain area that wasn't maybe uncovered? We think we've covered that part of it. But I get very uncomfortable, and I think I would hope that most cities would have some level of uncomfortability with how is this development I'm about ready to give a preliminary approval to going to be situated on land nearby our home, or nearby a number of homes and other parts of town. So I think with that part in mind, I just, I can't comment on all these standards. I've been aware of them for, just a few hours today. But I really, really think it would be wise of council to, at least on this portion, pause for a little bit more review and analysis.
Kristen, will you come up here for a second? I got a handful of a few things. Let's start here. Setbacks. How did we arise at 250? And the reason I ask this is, I've looked at counties in other states where there's a high concentration of data centers, and from what I can see, generally accepted setback that these counties and municipalities have approved has been anywhere from 100 to 200 feet. Fairfax County, Virginia being one, they adopted it in April of '24. Didn't make it up. How did you come up with 250 feet?
So we first look at the Farmington Code for the setbacks that are required for under this code for MUCI, and quickly realized that that wasn't adequate. And we have looked at how data center growth has occurred in these other areas, especially in Virginia, and how close they've been to other types of uses. And it is our intent to create more buffers because we really feel that the natural vegetation is an important way to preserve and mitigate the impacts. So if we can preserve the natural vegetation, we have more room to add in the taller berms, berms in general, add in more landscaping. So that additional distance just allows more ability to create this wider buffer that's more, creates that bigger buffer between those different uses. So in terms of 250 feet, I'll tell you that, you guys have all done this for a long time. It can be the setback game, and we could have come in and said, 50 feet, but we really wanted to put our best foot forward first so that this wasn't a negotiating point, because we felt like 250 really helped raise the bar in what is an appropriate setback in this situation.
Okay. Now, extending on the setback, and I'm staying in point one, kind of going into point two here, though. So if I'm standing there and I want to visualize this, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have a property line. So I have a curb, I have some grass, there's an existing fence that's there. That's the property line. From the property line, you go in 250 feet, okay? But within that 200 feet or 250 feet is the natural buffer, a berm, and then there's a secondary fence that's inside of that. So the big ugly fence that has the razor wire and all the things that nobody wants to see, right, is the one that's in as far as possible as to not see it,
Yes.
right? Okay.
Yes.
The existing perimeter fence, does that stay in place or does that get removed to allow for the natural buffer to look more integrated with the topography in that area?
The existing perimeter fence that's on the golf course now is not actually on the property line,
Correct.
right? It's further into the golf course property.
Yep.
And so that will be relocated to the property line. And that's the fence that we added in the commitment that we would work with those residents to come up with a design that they prefer, because that's essentially their fence. So then we'll have their, say, residential fence, then the 40-foot natural buffer. And then inside that 40-foot natural buffer, somewhere in there, then would be the taller security fencing.
Would it be unreasonable to ask that the perimeter fence be on the inside of the natural buffer, berm, and then security fence? And where I'm going with this is, one of the pieces that's stated in here regards the trees. And it says to the greatest extent possible, right? Who determines greatest extent? We say we want a bunch of them up. You say we can't do that, so more of them are gonna come down. Is there a way to integrate more, we'll just call it green space, with the natural buffer so that for families in the area that want to utilize, now understand that we're going on the line of like trespassing and going onto other property, but a open space area where there is not a perimeter fence on the property line. Is that feasible? Are there security measures that you have to have where a secondary fence is required? I'm looking through the plausibility of where we can go with that.
It's my understanding that the residents, especially on the western side, would like to have they still want their yards to be fenced in. So their back fence is now, it's the golf course fence. So it's my understanding that they still want to have their yards fully fenced in. And so that's why we've said that whenever that fence line moves, it will just become their residential backyard fence.
Okay.
That's based off of what we've heard from several residents there.
So what I would ask then is, subject to an approval, this ends up going back to the planning commission anyway, to re-engage, involve the community to address that. Because if we're talking about a fence has to be up for one area but not another, and we're talking about 3 different types of fence or screening that could be used, right? There's cost incurred to that, and if there's another way to achieve a similar net outcome, and get through the aesthetics of it, right? So you're not standing there, because they're used to a fence being there for, depending on how long they've lived there, 15 years, 20 years, right? It's been there. Now, all of a sudden, it moves closer, right? Does it have to be there, is what I'm getting at. Can we, if the security fence is in and we're trying to get it out of sight, we're trying to get it behind the berm, does that perimeter fence even need to be there? I want you guys to go back and figure that out.
Okay.
I think I don't think that what we've seen and been told is the best possible outcome for all parties. And I think there's greater resolve that we can achieve by going back and figuring that piece out.
Okay. We are definitely happy to re-engage on that topic, and come up, we want to, it was, like I said, that was my understanding that was what those residents wanted, but I certainly haven't talked to all of the residents there.
Okay.
And so we will work to engage with them.
Okay, thank you. Another question I had is, let's come back to that later. Fence is good there. The trees, again, to me, that's a big thing. To me, the trees are a part of the natural buffer. They're a part of the mitigation. The trees play a huge factor. Not only that, but you can't pick them up and move them, and they are decades and decades and decades old, right? To preserve as much as possible in the area surrounding is going to go a long way to help lessen the aesthetics of what the project is going to be.
Yes, we agree and recognize that too.
Okay. As it pertains to building heights, this is an area where I'm confused, okay? Because one of the things that's mentioned in here is the height of the principal structure. Now, I understand because there's some people that look at fit plans and initial site plans, and that's what they visualize, and they think that's what's being built, okay? But to take a 2D rendering and put it into 3D, the average person can't do that and put it in a context that 80 feet doesn't look like this, it might look like this at certain distances. I don't understand principal structure at a maximum height of 80 feet when what we've seen is the fit plan and there's no interior buildings. Now, I know that there's setback, right? You're gonna go 10 feet for every 1 foot in height, correct? But the building's not gonna be built like this.
Right.
Okay, so this is where we have to make a decision based on what we have in front of us, because we don't have a final plat, we don't have a total rendering, right? We know that things are subject to change. We cannot have 80-foot buildings at the minimum setback. Like, I understand that the way that this is proposed is that an 80-foot building, technically starts at 550 feet from the property line, right?
310.
310, sorry.
Can you pull up the plan? I think I know where you're
But
going.
where I'm going with this is, what we're looking at is a few buildings that essentially make up a perimeter. There's like 2 buildings on there that would actually be an interior building. I understand this is a site plan and a fit plan, right? But as I look at this and I read this, 2 buildings could be 80 feet, based on this. Because the perimeter, because again, you're not gonna build a building with a roof like this.
Correct.
Okay?
Correct.
Help me understand how 50 to 80 gives you discretion to where, at the same time, we can allow it to be built for an to be determined end user, right? You guys are gonna figure that out. But we've gotta be able to make a decision based on what we are potentially gonna be looking at years down the road.
Okay. Is there a pointer here, or should I just walk over there? I can talk about it.
That's fine.
So,
Actually, I'm sorry, can you stay on the mics?
yes.
Sorry
I
about
don't have
that.
a pointer.
That's all right.
Okay.
think this one works.
So in this plan, if you look on the west side of the property, those buildings that are all horizontal, laid out, those would all be 50-foot tall buildings because the edge of the building is at the 250-foot setback. And you're right, these buildings don't step up, they're one level. And so then all of those buildings, because they start at that 250-foot setback, would have to be 50 feet in height. The only one on that northern plan that could be 80 feet is the most interior building. The one on the east side is shown at the 250-foot setback, so that would be a 50-foot tall building. under this scenario. If all of the buildings were 80 feet, they'd all have to be in that box of 310 feet.
And I think that's where I'm going with this, is because one of the concerns has been about the time frame to get to this point, right? And we understand that the PUC is involved, and there's a lot of other entities that this whole thing is subject to approval. What we cannot have happen is to be shown this, to talk about PUD standards, to talk about building height, and then come back in a month or 2 months or 3 months, or when an end user is identified, and this gets completely changed to a bunch of buildings that are sitting on 310 feet and they're all 80 feet tall. That can't happen. Under no circumstances can that happen.
And can do that under the current guidelines.
Right, which is where I'm trying to go with this is, somehow, you guys have to get a rendering to the planning commission to be looked at that is more than just a fit plan. Like, we've got to have, I mean, you guys are very smart. You've done this, you know what you're doing, you know who potential targeted end users are, right? You can't show us this and then come back in a few months and show us this. That doesn't work for anybody. It doesn't matter who's sitting here. It doesn't work. What I'm asking for is, this is always, we try to do everything in good faith, right? We're gonna go through and we're gonna talk about more standards, but when you go back and start to iron it out, the next thing that comes forward has to be very clean. It just has to. Like we can't be running blind with this project. We can't.
So I hear you, and we want to respond to that, and we want to respond to that with graphics and the detail that you are requesting. So for clarity, I think what I want to understand, what I want to also just frame up is that this is building a framework. This isn't the site plan, which you all understand. And so there are a myriad of different layouts that could occur here. You know, with taller buildings, you would have greater setbacks. If the building height is limited, then the site would have to, still everything has to fit within the 250 feet. So there's trade-offs there. And that's why we showed this plan, because it shows the 50-foot buildings with a limited 80-foot building. There are, like I said, there are a number of different layouts that could occur here with various heights in buildings. So I guess I'm asking for more clarity around what kind of layouts would you like to see?
If this fit plan, and I'm going to use the north-south buildings on the east property line, as this PUD is written, with the setback to an 80-foot building, the inner building, north-south, as we move from east to west, that inner building could be 80 feet, okay? Proposed, how wide is the building to the right of it? So the one that's 50 feet, is that a 100-foot wide building?
I believe it's about 100 feet, yes.
So using the fit plan, we're saying that an 80-foot building could start at 350 feet, not 310 the way that the PUD is written. That's what I'm asking for. If this has been built and presented to say 80 feet on the interior is good, and I know it's only 40 feet, but 40 feet is enough because it's our natural buffer. Every foot matters when it comes to height and elevation and grade. So that's what I'm getting at is, if you have developed this and said that inner building is 80 feet, and we're looking at a fit plan, and we say, yeah, that's okay at 350, but this is written to get you to 310. Again, I don't want to get too far in the weeds here, but we have to preserve the line of sight as much as we reasonably can, while still maintaining the viability of the project for you guys.
Okay.
I think you can accomplish both.
Yes.
You see where I'm going?
Yes, I do.
That's what
yes, we
okay.
can.
Thank you.
Okay.
I don't have any other questions as it pertains to the design standards. Is there any other questions or comments? And we can go to all three, whether it pertains to comp plan, rezoning, or the preliminary plat, preliminary PUD.
Mayor, I really appreciated your last set of questions. And I think that gets to the point of why I think it's, I just feel very passionately about the fact that I'm worried that if we approve it, that line of sight that you're talking about is going to be lost. And if somebody can convince me why it would be detrimental to pause on the preliminary approval, please let me know. Because if we're causing undue harm, I mean, you know, again, I'm not trying to defend, you know, a turf per se. It looks like the vote's going to go a little bit differently than maybe I'd like it to. But, you know, keep in mind that Tract actually, to their credit, put in a 250-foot setback. We had a setback of 0. I mean, really, by the standards we have in place, they would have not, they could have just went right up to that edge. So, I mean, your points about this are very well taken from my end. So, I mean, I do think, let's just make sure that we're doing this right. And you know, and Tony, correct me if I'm mistaken, I mean, do we have design standards that are set up for this type of project? I mean, obviously we do for a business or an industrial, but we really don't have design standards established for a technology park of this type, correct?
That's correct.
So that's, sorry, I'm losing my voice. That's my concern here. So if we're going to do it, let's make sure that we do it right. Let's make sure the standards are appropriate. Let's make sure that, you know, it meets what we are looking for as a council. And that's really my ask.
So at the end of the day, and this is the uncomfortable part, and this is the part that has to be said out loud. For decades, this community has been screaming economic development. To the gentleman's point earlier, who said, I pay, right? The difference is this time it's in your backyard. But we can't make the decision based on whose backyard it's in. Because, no, you can't. I'm not going to get into a back and forth. You can't make a decision based on where the project is. You have to go through and establish performance guidelines and development standards. In a situation where something new comes that we haven't dealt with before, yes, there is a time to take pause and make sure that you go through and put as much information on the table as you can. This process has been months in the making. I don't see any reason, staff has recommended, we have to take action on it, whether it approves or not, we still have to take action on it. So if council doesn't feel as if there's enough within the preliminary plat and the PUD, then it'll be denied, and then the process will go through. If it's approved, it's still going to go back to the Planning Commission. They're still going to work on refining and working through the PUD and the plat to bring forward a final PUD and plat, which could look much more in depth than what we have in front of us. That's.
You're rezoning this. You're not bringing this back to you're rezoning this. Once this thing is zoning of mixed-use commercial industrial, that's what they want. They can do anything approved there once it's mixed-use commercial industrial. Anything.
Are there any other council comments or questions as it pertains? No.
You're not approving a fucking data center.
I would seek a motion for approval to adopt Resolution 2024, TAC 98, adopting the comprehensive plan amendments for the properties commonly known as Fountain Valley Golf Course and the Angus properties, and authorize the submittal of the amendments to the Metropolitan Council.
Motion to approve.
Motion by Katie.
Second.
Second by Nick. Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Lean.
Yes.
Councilmember Wilson.
No.
Councilmember Burnham.
Yes.
Mayor Hoyt.
Yes.
Councilmember Bernance.
Yes.
The second item presented, I would seek a motion to adopt ordinance 2024 TAC 11, rezoning the properties commonly known as Fountain Valley Golf Course and the Angus properties.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Motion by Holly, second by Nick. Call the roll.
Councilmember Wilson.
No.
Councilmember Burnjum.
Yes.
Mayor Hoyt.
Yes.
Councilmember Bernance.
Yes.
Councilmember Lean.
Yes.
The third action item,
If I may, Mayor, real quick, I would recommend a motion based on the conversation, and let me know if anyone disagrees, a motion to adopt Resolution 2024-99,
Yep.
and then hit that hot list that you were talking about, so fencing, faux windows, buffer, and height as additional conditions for final approval.
all right. Then action item number 3. I'd seek motion to approve, or I'd seek motion to adopt Resolution 2024-99, approving the preliminary plat and preliminary plan unit development for the Farmington Technology Park, directing staff to further address the items of fencing, fall windows, buffer, and height.
And as a condition of the final.
As a condition of the final plat and PUD.
Yeah.
Motion to approve.
Motion by Katie.
Second.
I'll go second by Holly. Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Burnjum.
Yes.
Mayor Hoyt.
Yes.
Councilmember Bernance.
Yes.
Councilmember Lean.
Yes.
Councilmember Wilson.
No.
Anything for roundtable?
No, Mayor.
Does anybody have anything for roundtable? All right, seeing none, then I'd seek a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion by Katie, second by Nick.
You come back my daughter up and you show her the next 5 houses.
Call-
I don't give a fuck if I get
Call the roll.
You come do it to my house,
Yeah,
John.
call roll for
You
adjournment.
come over. Anytime.
Why don't we get to vote on this?
You may be in the fucking parking lot.
I hope you're not out of water. Really, it's unbelievable that we don't want, we want to vote on this.
We have a,
Why do you get to make all the choices?
hey Lynn, we have a motion to adjourn. All in favor?
Anyone ask?
Aye.
I'm not sure who to ask. Just
Motion to
some.
adjourn?
Aye.
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 Motion to adjourn?
Yes.
Aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned at 9:22.